Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Mark Gilham. Mark is the vice president and head of the Enable Advisory practice. Most of his past experience is in strategic finance and accounting roles, which has allowed him to develop a firsthand perspective that can certainly help procurement teams today and that I think this audience will be particularly interested in. So, hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Looking forward to talking all things procurement.
Absolutely. Although including the F word, F being finance, of course.
That's it.
Before we dive into that, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background for people who haven't met you?
Absolutely. So I am an accountant by trade. Started out in banking, then went to building and construction materials, where I partnered for a long time with all of our procurement operations and sales. Before moving into a CFO role, and now I spend my days at Enable advising businesses on what good looks like and how to get there.
Now, it's interesting, you talk about what good looks like. Since we've talked about both finance and accounting, people might assume this is going to be a very numbers-heavy conversation, but we want to go beyond that as well, maybe even to try to get close to value. So when you think about some of the different perspectives of the roles that you've been in, the different people that you work with, how do the buy side of companies and the sell side of companies look at value differently?
I think this is something that's evolving all of the time. I mean, if I start with the buy side, when I first started in finance, one of my tasks was to measure procurement gains. So the improvements on contracts. And frustratingly, the measurements were largely driven by cost improvements.
Yeah.
And I think anybody can, well, not anybody, but most people can negotiate a reduction in cost if it comes with a reduction in service or quality, things like that. But they're really hard to measure. So in the early days of supporting procurement, what you would see is maybe the wrong behaviors. I think as time has gone on, that has improved dramatically, especially as the sell side and the buy side of businesses has come closer together. And I think that has really required the procurement team to understand what is needed by the sales team in order to actually drive value. So what does the market want? What does the customer want? Where do we make the most margin? These are all really important. And that is kind of on that resell or direct side.
Sure.
But then on the indirect side, the business feels it almost immediately if you sacrifice quality or value in exchange for reduction in cost. And so I think, from a finance perspective, we've had to become a lot smarter at making sure that what we actually ask for, we understand, because asking for a reduction in cost potentially is not the right request. So yes, it's been an interesting kind of journey to see how the roles have evolved.
It's interesting and truthfully validating to hear you say from a role in finance that oftentimes when the focus was overly placed on cost reduction, that sometimes it was driving the wrong behaviors. I'm positive this is not the first time you've heard somebody say that procurement is really frustrated in that they feel like their impact is only measured in terms of cost reduction, because there are so many other things, many other business objectives that we're working towards. When we talk about this value in terms of what can be created above and beyond cost reduction, it's really hard to get metrics to go along with that.
From a finance lens, what are some of the ways that we might look at or try to measure and capture that value that doesn't fit quite as neatly into the blocks of a spreadsheet as something like cost reduction or even cost avoidance, as messy as that can be?
I think, there's a couple of routes you can go, but if I think of a prime example of something that is very measurable was our electricity bill as an organization. And that was under scrutiny, and procurement were tasked with reducing that. Well, that's nice and easy because you get the bill every month.
Right.
But the question was very much focused on paying less per unit of electricity used, which kind of good luck with that, with dealing with the utility companies. And the question should have been, how can we use fewer units?
True.
And when we allowed procurement to truly kind of thrive, the view was, well, if we invest in LED lighting, we will save on electricity.
Okay.
And that required finance to then make a decision, because it was a case of if we invest. So there's things like that. There's other things where I see the way the contracts are structured help measure, but this is a bit of a double-edged sword. So what I see is people, rather than negotiating just a straight reduction in price, they might negotiate a rebate, as an example. And that is procurement's way of saying, well, this is the bit I secured.
Okay.
But I mentioned it is a double-edged sword when you get into the world of rebates.
Because you have to administer it, right? You have to make sure it happens. You have to track it. All of the conditions have to be met. So there is a little bit of sort of administrative burden that goes along with a rebate structure, as opposed to just lower pricing up front, correct?
Absolutely correct. And where it gets really interesting is when I think sometimes buying teams don't realize how much influence they probably have over a business.
Yeah.
So if you think about a business where the sales team, the way they price to the market is they mark up from a cost.
Sure.
Well, the thing they control is the markup. They decide, are we marking up by 20%, 25, 30? They'll have some numbers in their heads depending on the market, the product. Who's responsible for the cost that they see?
That would be procurement.
That would be procurement.
Yep.
And so sometimes a lower cost is not a better cost, because a lower cost means a lower price out to the market.
Yeah.
And so when in scenarios, for example, you might switch supply, and it might be you switching to get a 5% cost reduction. Well, if you switch and your sales people operate that way, you'll be no better off as a business, because they will pass that straight to the market. And that is a good example where you might use a rebate because you just lock in that saving. But as you mentioned, these things can become complicated. My advice to procurement would be understand who's going to manage these rebates. Generally, it's either procurement or it's finance, but it's always going to involve finance and accounting at some point.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is negotiate things that your business can't manage, because what happens is, and I've seen this, a payment comes through sometimes in the post just after the year end. Everybody celebrates thinking, this is great, we've got some money. But the reality is, if nobody was expecting it, how many other checks didn't turn up that you should have?
Right.
So as much as it's great, it's probably actually could be so much greater, if that makes sense.
Now, I think when we start to bring into this the collaboration or the relationship between finance and procurement, speaking from my own experience, you typically only encounter finance, first of all, when you have to. And second of all, when you've finished a sourcing project or signed a contract and they are validating or auditing the savings claim that you're making associated with that contract. So you're sort of taking a relationship that might be a little rocky anyway, and only bringing the teams together at a very tense moment for procurement, which doesn't necessarily set the ground for a great tone of relationship, let's say. Are there other times when procurement and finance should be getting together to exchange ideas, to collaborate, to share with each other what's going on, so that it's not just at these tense sort of oversight moments when they're sitting down to work together?
Absolutely, yes. But I do understand that it's really difficult. I've been in that position where you want a really healthy relationship with your procurement team. The idea being that when you need something, they will help you, but likewise, when they need something, you will help them. And because there's always things that sometimes go wrong, and you want to address it as a team.
Yeah.
But then what happens is your bosses say you need to mark the homework of your procurement team. You need to say whether these are genuine procurement gains. And in some cases, you mentioned earlier about measurement, it is subjective.
Yeah.
Value is a very subjective measure. And so if you haven't built the right relationships, it can be really difficult. It can actually make things worse. So for me, building that relationship is really important. We went as far as to actually, even though we were in different offices, they were only about an hour apart. So I insisted that either myself or somebody from my team was in the procurement office every week.
Okay.
To foster and build that relationship. And make it so that they didn't see us as somebody else, but very much as part of the team. And I also get that it can be quite intimidating for somebody to walk into a finance office when we're all there quiet, and you can imagine puts their calculator down and turns around and looks at you. Yep. It's we don't get many visitors in our department, and so we spent a lot of time with procurement. I think that the key is it's about combining the strengths of the two departments. Finance have a skill set. It's not procurement. It's something that is generally quite analytical. And what it means is we can bring another set of eyes to whether it is a decision. It could be that the contractors become so complicated. Yeah. You just want somebody to say, is this better or worse? And where's it better and where's it worse? Or just a sounding board. Before I take this to my head of procurement, and I've had this a lot, before we do this, would you support this? Do you think this is a better contract? Yeah. That kind of thing is really powerful. And then likewise, if finance must go to procurement for help too. Because if it's not a case of we're more senior or anything like that. So actually by asking for help and working with them, procurement teams tend to open up a bit. So absolutely, where we receive a contract, taking the time to teach us all about it, and not just about the contract, but why has it been negotiated that way? Why have we structured the deal this way? Helps us in finance to when we're doing the numbers to understand if it makes sense. And this is really the other really important piece here is the distinguishing between what I would deem as modern finance teams and traditional finance teams. Okay. So traditional finance teams report the past. So your typical accountant produces the annual financials, maybe monthly financials. That's their job. They're always looking backwards. More and more businesses are expecting finance professionals to influence the future. And that for me is where, coming back to that word value, you get real value from these expensive professions. And how do we influence the future? Well, we work with teams like procurement to understand what they do and just bring a different perspective, bring a different set of skills to the table. It should be complementary in what we're doing. And so if your finance and procurement teams are not working together, you're really losing something, I think, as an organization, because they should work in harmony.
Especially since it sounds like with your examples about traditional and modern or forward-looking finance, I mean, there's a similar transition that's been going on in procurement from really sort of traditional purchasing where just like with finance, it was very rear view mirror focused. You were looking at former spend, trying to negotiate contracts, sort of assuming that the same buying patterns would continue, as opposed to projecting demand, figuring out how that affects leverage, looking at new sources of supply or ways to meet business needs. If both teams are doing that, I see that as an opportunity to say, okay, we don't do the same things. We don't have the same strengths, but definitely we are complementary. Let's figure out how to make this transition together and help each other forward. That would both be good for finance and procurement, but also be an advantage for the company as a whole. Given that finance is on a similar journey to procurement, where there is a focus on forward looking, there is a focus on value, the struggle becomes communicating that and selling that idea to the rest of the C-suite. How can procurement and or finance, if they're on the same journey, make sure that the C-suite understands their full value? I mean, it does seem like finance has a little bit of an advantage because I think the C-suite almost always implies the CFO is sitting up there. The CPO, if there is one, may or may not actually be a full part of the C-suite. So maybe there's a little bit of an edge there. But how do we make sure that full potential gets through so that neither function gets contained to that sort of traditional or legacy focus?
I think you're absolutely right in that it all starts with the CFO. If you have a backward-looking CFO, a traditional, then the whole thing is will be a bit of a struggle. But the modern value-adding CFO is really going to be encouraging what we normally call business partnering. And the only area where they sometimes miss is we will business partner our sales or operating functions, but we don't business partner what our functions like procurement, which in some cases might be seen as a support function.
Yeah.
And that's a miss because these functions, whether it's, even things like HR or IT, these are all functions that can drive value, but are definitely in procurement. And definitely if it's direct procurement as well, it's a huge opportunity for businesses. What I would also say for procurement professionals, I know it's a constant challenge to get the data.
Yes.
Well, the good news is go and find your finance person, become best friends with them and work together because they probably do have access to the data or a much greater chance of getting it. So you work with finance, they get the data, they bring you the insights, you explain to them what these numbers actually mean and why. And that's when you start to get that kind of symbiotic relationship where procurement make the decisions and finance guide those decisions.
Yeah.
There's lots in many finance functions, there's lots of what I would deem as really budding accountants who want to get out from the monotony of spreadsheets.
Yeah.
They want to understand what makes a business tick. They want that CFO role. Well, you don't get to be a CFO if you don't understand what makes a business tick. And in my opinion, procurement are often underrepresented because if you haven't got the product on the shelf, you can't sell it.
Yeah.
So I think we all learned that during the pandemic. But also, from a business perspective, procurement and supply chain, that's a huge chunk of your business. And it's a huge chunk that, you should be helping nurture value through. So many customers, and I work on the sales side, they would say to us, they don't come to us because of the price, they come to us because of the service we offer.
Yeah.
Well, that service falls over very quickly if we haven't got the kind of the buy side of our business working effectively. And my final thought on that would be, when I look at businesses that succeeded during COVID and those who didn't, the difference wasn't the sales team, it was the procurement team keeping the supply chain moving.
Well, first of all, you're now everybody's favorite finance representative, just so that you know. Thank you for that recognition. If you were to offer procurement one piece of advice about having a better working relationship with finance, what would you suggest?
This, I think, it's a bit of a mantra from a finance perspective. And I would say whether you're in procurement or any department, even finance themselves, the thing that finance leaders do not like ever are surprises. We don't even like good surprises. We're that miserable. We like just no surprises.
Yeah.
So transparency is absolutely the key here, which is scary for a lot of people, because if you've negotiated something and you think it's a great deal and then it turns out actually it's not, well, we need to know that. And I get the temptation is to try and bury it, as an example, and hope for the best. But that's probably not going to get you in, kind of in the good graces of finance. So no surprises. And I would say give finance the opportunity to get out from beyond their spreadsheets. Even better, kind of encourage them to get out from beyond the spreadsheets and show them how the business works. Show them how you work. Show them how they can add value, because they do want to add value. They probably just don't know where to start. And I think working with the buy side of the business for finance people is an area where they can arguably add the most value. So we do want to help, but we do need a bit of education, because when we become accountants, we're not really taught this side of the business, as in the how to add value, as much as we're taught how to report the past. So these are kind of softer skills that we have to learn and nurture. And so young budding accountants, an example, can immediately fall into that trap of, well, you're just cutting costs. Isn't that what your role is? Because that's what we've been taught in the textbooks. And maybe hopefully those textbooks have got better now. But I'm not going to say how long ago I read them. But I just think finance is so much more. It's an enlightening role when we're working with our stakeholders, as opposed to monitoring them and things like that.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I have one more question for you. And this is actually something that we ask every guest the first time they join the show. I'm going to give you two questions. You can answer either one, and a broad range of answers are correct. So your options are either, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Given what we're talking about, I'm going to tackle the first one as the sourcing hero. And I believe there are many of them out there. And I would say that they probably do go unrecognized in too many organizations. You win a big sale and your CEO shouts about it. You secure supply to meet a big contract. Well, nobody knows about it unless you didn't do it. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, it's always tricky. It's just, but a sourcing hero for me is somebody that is, and I was going to use the word liked, but I'm not sure if that's the right word, but certainly respected by everybody they work with, internally and externally, who adds value not only for the business they work for, but for the external partners they work with too. So they create thriving, healthy supply chains. Because to the context of the earlier part of our conversation, just taking out cost, that's not sourcing. That's not a sourcing hero. But somebody who can come in and add value, I think that's where I would lean towards. And I'm assuming they don't wear capes, but if they could, they should.
Well, really interesting getting to hear sort of the opportunity that exists between procurement and finance, and even directly with accounting team members that maybe a lot of people didn't know existed. If people are meeting you for the first time through this episode of the podcast and they want to reach out and connect with you, what is the best place for them to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, as most people are. And so you can look me up there. I also, you can contact me through the Enable website, so enable.com. But most people just reach out to me on LinkedIn. You will find me under Enable, talking about all things rebates, tariffs at the moment, highly topical, and just trying to help people understand there is a better way when it comes to so many of the headaches that we face.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Stu. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.